Hey guys, welcome to the Closing Call Podcast with your host, Jimmy Henderson, and my guest of the day. This is Mr. Saul David, one of my best and oldest friends in the world. And we're just going to dive in a little bit today and kind of tell you who we are. So obviously this is a real estate podcast, if you will. So that's our foundation. But you don't do real estate. And so, you're like, hey, what am I doing here? Let me tell you what he's doing here, right? So I want to give you a little bit of background information as far as who we are and how we got to know each other. So now, because he's super cool, then he goes by Saul David. But when he was like 12, it was Saul. And so he was a new kid at our school. We went to Wedgwood Middle School, and I think 7th grade, I guess. And
7th grade?
Yeah, so he shows up, new kid from Detroit. And he was a lot shorter than, he was a little kid. But I remember he was sitting by himself, and so at lunch I go and I sit down with Saul, and he introduces himself, and he's like, my name is Saul. And I was like, oh, that's super cool, like from the Bible, right? Like, King Saul, or, Saul, and, later became the Apostle Paul. And he said, yeah. And he says, what's your last name? And he said, David. And I said, shut your mouth. Your name is not Saul David. Like, what are the odds, right? And I was mind blown by that. And then he said, you never guess what my middle name is. And I was like, what's your middle name? And he said, Jesus. I said, you liar. But now we know that Saul Jesus David is actually Saul Jesus David, because that's we all progress into.
But that's what happens when you move from Detroit to Texas.
Yeah.
I had gotten so tired of trying to correct people and hearing every different thing, and so even now, I think as an adult, with my dad being in the military, it was always David, 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 and so when I would see people struggling, I'm like, it's just David. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's at that response, I get it a lot. First name, last name. Oh, it's very biblical. It's 3 kings, and
right.
So I don't know if that was intentional for my dad, but as I'm involved in ministry now, like I'll go with it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was coincidence. It was the grace of God. So that's our story. So we've known each other since then, and just been fantastic friends. God took us obviously in different directions for a long time, but I think over the last 20 years has really just kind of kept our hearts aligned. So I remember, because you do freight brokering and freight forwarding and stuff, and that was kind of your first and only business ownership endeavor, right?
That was the first thing that I got into. I think I always knew I wanted to do something.
Yeah.
I got a job from a friend of a friend, kind of entry level, and that place, the guy that was running it, he was about my age now. It didn't seem exceptionally sharp, but he was doing very well, and I was like, if this guy can do it.
That's exactly how I got into what I ended up, which was I knew that the Lord was leading me to be a business owner, but I was in banking at the time, and I said, well, I don't have any skills. I'm good with people and I'm good at banking, but unless I'm going to open a bank, that doesn't work, right? People aren't going to pay me to go to lunch with them. And I remember thinking, who does what I can do? And my insurance agent. And I don't know, Adrian, if you're watching this right now, but I remember thinking, if Adrian can do it, I can do it, right? Like, he's a regular guy like I am, and so that's so funny.
Well, and that comes, I don't mean for that to come off sounding, it wasn't negative. I just thought he seemed very normal. He was a great communicator with people, was a good motivator, and he was just a doer, and he was a visionary. And so it didn't seem like, those seemed like some skill sets that, I felt like God had blessed me with a little bit.
Yeah.
I love talking to
something
people.
Something that you can transition to.
Yeah, and so just the idea of being lost in of where to go, thinking, let me try this.
Yeah.
And it just, it all worked out.
Well, I remember I took him to lunch, and I said, hey, let me go to lunch. I want to learn, how you got started. And he says, well, let's go to Hooters. And I was like, let's go to Hooters, right? Like, I don't know if I'd ever even been there, maybe once before. But we went, and I was like, tell me how to get started, and he shared the ins and outs. He said, Jimmy, if you don't have at least like $10,000 in the bank, don't do this. I had $1,500 in my 401k. Like, that's it. Like, I had to save up to be broke. I was so poor. And, but I was like, nah, I really feel like the Lord's leading me here. And I don't know but the Lord let me do it anyhow.
Right.
And
so
so
I remember getting the call.
That was the thing. That's what I was about to say. The very first phone call.
You're like, guess what? And I'm like, what? I'm opening an insurance company. And I was like, weren't you at Chase yesterday?
Yeah, I'm still there. I got fired that following week, but yes, I remember you're my first phone call because I said I just joined the ranks of the self-employed.
That's right.
And I called him because
those exact words I remember.
That's it, because he was the only guy that I knew that was self-employed, and I thought, that wasn't my background. That wasn't your background. We're nothing wrong with employees, and the world needs that, but I just didn't feel like that's what God had for me. And that insurance agency in my life, matter of fact, I just sold it last month. That was 13, almost 14 years ago. But I sold that, but that's what led me into real estate. So, and for you, I know that has provided the foundation for you to do some great things. We'll get into that in a second. So, you called me the other day, and it was so great because Linda and I were together, and you just sent me a video message, and you're like, this is huge. You don't understand what just happened. I can't get into this right now, but I got to tell you about this experience that we just had at this open house. And immediately we're like, what is it? What is it? Which he had said, I can't talk right now. I was like, yeah, you're talking right now. I said, you're not about to just leave me hanging that way. So finally he called. So, I tell you this, there was a realtor that, I'll let you share the story, but I'll set a little bit of foundation. So there was a realtor that was at this particular open house, and he went by a very catchy name, borderline cheesy. It was a cheesy name of for example, there's a billboard right now of a personal injury attorney, and I think he calls himself
almost like the Texas Hammer.
The Texas Hammer, right? But this guy was like something cowboy. I mean, he was like the Indian cowboy or something along those lines. But that's his thing. He's got a cowboy hat on. But if you read the name, it's a name of Middle Eastern descent. But he's like, no, I'm in Texas, so this is what we do. Have a cowboy hat. So we won't say the name in case the guy's watching. I don't want to throw the guy under the bus. So tell me about your experience in this open house.
Well, and I think too, just to put it in perspective, we just a few years ago paid off our house. Mm-hmm. So we have not been in the market for 15 years for a house. So it has been a long time since we've experienced an open house. And probably when we did, we were just kids. I don't know that we would have known a good experience from a bad experience anyway. But fast forward to where we are now, and in the community that we're staying at, it's a nicer community. And just out of curiosity, as we're leaving, there's only one way to go out. There's a house that had an open house. Mm-hmm. And so my wife was like, I'd like to see, kind of what these other builds look like, see what the cost is. It was really more of just informative, kind of investigative, than it actually was to purchase. Right. But we were certainly in a place where we could purchase.
Yeah, it could turn into a purchase.
Yeah,
sure.
And because we like that area, we were thinking about staying there permanently. And so we went in kind of half-hearted, open to the possibility, but not necessarily shy.
So new realtors that may be watching right now, I want you to take notes. This is what not to do in an open house from the point of view of a potential buyer. So,
right, and I think too, it was the idea of my expectation was I had a blank slate. I hadn't gone through 7 of them, and I'm not comparing one to the other. Mm-hmm. This was just my experience as going into an open house, and from the moment that I set foot in the property, I could tell things were going left quick.
Right.
And as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and as someone who really values personal growth and development, I've just been exposed to a lot. I definitely wasn't just born with what I know now, but through seeing and learning from industry experts and best practices of just how to do business and communicate, this was a train wreck. and so I'll tee it up for you. We try to walk in, my wife and I, to the house. And as the door opens, there might be 4 inches between the door and this little table that's set up. And mind you, I'm expecting the table. It's going to be there, and there's going to be someone, and that's kind of your guide. And so that wasn't the idea that it was there, wasn't a big deal. The way that it was barricaded in, so where he almost had to move the table a little bit to create enough room for us to enter the house. And so it was almost like a forced stoppage.
Yeah, like a bouncer. He was charging a cover charge.
Cover charge for the house. And so, and he was polite, introduced himself with his marketing tag name.
Pseudonym.
Which at the time I didn't know enough about this person or had enough to really decide. It was that borderline kind of corny, catchy thing. And so he started asking some questions, some basic stuff, kind of get your name and this and that. But it was more than that. It was extensive questions. It was taking an inordinately long time to just get to the point. And as I'm filling it out, my wife is like, well, can I shimmy on by to go? And he sort of...
So he stopped you and you're filling out like your personal contact information, that stuff, before he even lets you into the house. You're like in the doorway.
Right. And actually before it was, hey, I'm Saul, how you doing? This is my wife, Denise. It was like, hey, how you guys doing? If you'll go ahead and just sign in real quick. That was the very first thing out of his mouth.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, so I sign, and if you would just put your phone number down here and your email address. Do you have an agent? Are you looking for an agent? I mean, like 6 or 7 questions.
All fine questions to be on a questionnaire sometime during an open house.
Yeah, and I thought some of those would have been good to fill conversation while we're walking the house and building rapport. But it was like a withdrawal of information before we were allowed to see the hallway.
Okay.
And so it was...
Well, that's private information. The hallway is something not everyone can see.
And I thought, well, maybe maybe this is just the open house process.
Right, which it's not.
And I told him that I wasn't comfortable giving my email out. I said, but if we like what we see and it's good for communication, I'll certainly leave it. And so we go into, and right as we walk in, I'm about 4 steps into the living room, and the comment is made that, just so you know, there's already been 2 offers made on this house today.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really sure where that came from because I hadn't asked one question yet.
Right.
And he hadn't asked one question.
Right.
Do you guys have kids? Are you in the market? And so I was trying to guide him kind of where we were at. And I told him, listen, we have a property on the other side of town that we own. We're renting over here because it's convenient because of our kids and where they go to school at. And we like it here. And so we're thinking about being here permanently.
Right. Let me give you some information.
Yeah, trying to give you some context so you can sell me.
Right.
Right. And so as I'm doing this, instead of responding to the information that I provided him, to sort of inquire and pull on what we're looking for. Do you want a yard? Is it the garage?
Right.
Is the bathroom a big thing for you?
School district.
Does your wife love cooking? I mean, anything that would help him to sell the highlight parts of the house. The first question was, how much are you paying rent?
Yeah.
Which, I mean,
what's your credit score?
What's your blood type?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even you, as close as we are, like, if you ask me that question, like, I'm going to take a step back because I don't know that that's really anybody's.
Right.
Yeah,
we're guarded when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's even if you know the person, but I don't know you, and like I haven't consented to a credit app yet. Like, what's happening?
And so I just told him. I said, well, let's just say they're proud of the property.
Yeah.
To try to kind of shut that down politely. Right. And so as we're walking through, and Denise asks some question about like, does the appliances, are they coming with the house? And his response was, well, there's a hot tub in the back, and that comes with the house. And never circled back on the appliances.
That when there's a hot tub, then obviously the refrigerator stays also. So that's so funny.
It was just one of those things where I felt like just the communication was missing. Now hear my heart. The guy was not being rude.
Sure.
I think he genuinely thought he was. I think his charisma was there. I think he really thought he was being likable, and his kind of in his banter, but none of it had any value.
Yeah.
I asked a couple of questions about like the hardwood floor, like, did you know what kind it was? Did you know how tall the ceilings were? And he reaches in to hand me the paper that has like 15 different things in this little microscopic type, and he just kind of hands it to me and smiles, almost like
the MLS.
There you go.
I've answered your question sufficiently with this piece of paper.
Right. And so I kind of look at my wife and she looks at me and she just nods her head and we just keep walking through. And we're walking down where this little hallway that leads like to the garage.
Okay.
And it's got like the little built-in cubby that you can hang some coats on and put your shoes in the back.
Mudroom type thing.
And there's probably a little countertop, maybe a little bigger than this desk.
Okay.
Right. And they have a laptop on this countertop.
Okay.
And he says, yeah, and so that's the home office.
It's like the folding table for the laundry.
I think the folding table was wider than the hallway that we were in. And it wasn't, and again, it wasn't, they were using it as a home office. And I get that. But I asked you a question about the floor and the ceilings and the square footage of the house. And you hand me a sheet of paper.
Right.
And what you're trying to sell me is that this hallway, this is the home office.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and it had a beautiful kitchen. It had a really extravagant kind of back patio area.
Okay.
These are things that in my mind, like, show me these, tell me about
Showcase
this.
Those types.
This is Austin Stone, and this is bamboo from, I don't know. But this was where you decided to really drive it home, was the home office in the hallway. And so now I'm at the point where I'm starting to get irritated because he's following us around.
Right.
When my wife asked, is it okay if we just walk the house? And once we've had a chance to walk it, any questions that we have, bring them to you. Because she just
is that okay? Like, can you stay here?
Yeah, well, that feeling was because we kind of got like locked in at the front door, and then we sort of just kind of like locked at the hip, as if like we were at a car dealership. Like we weren't allowed to go anywhere unsupervised. And so we're doing our best to get some distance, just so we can have honest dialogue.
Sure.
What do you think about this? And here, it was very difficult because of that. And then as he gave us a little bit of space, he made the comment that he was gonna do us a solid and let us know what the offers already were in the house. But just so we knew, they were already over asking price. But the seller is gonna go with the highest bid.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, how long did you go to school to learn that? Yeah. They were going to take the most money.
It's going to throw you, but this actually is going to sell to whoever brings the most money. So now you've got the inside track. In case you were thinking, I'll just, smile when I give it to him.
Now, I will say this, that if I felt like those statements came from a place of genuineness, like, don't allow me to waste my time looking at a house and thinking about a house. If you really do know that there's some solid offers on there, and if that's the case, like, tee that up at the front door. Not, if you still would like to look, sometimes these deals fall apart, they don't go through. But it was really more of the tactic of like, what type of offer would you make? Like, how much would you be willing to offer
today
for this house right now? Almost like FOMO, you know? And he's a younger individual. He's kind of a millennial, and I don't know, maybe that's a tactic in how he feels like it works. But at this stage in our life, and with the amount of money that this house was going to cost, this was not going to be a rushed decision. And to be honest, had it been handled differently, we weren't really thinking about buying a house. It wasn't really on our radar. We knew that we could, but after looking at it, it brought up real dialogue between me and my wife. Like, you know what? We need to start shopping now because our daughter's going to graduate in a year, and I don't want to be looking for a house after she's graduated. We want to kind of know where we're at. So that would have been a great opportunity for us to say, listen, this house, we like this, and we don't like that. We want to stay around this zip code, so here's my number. Like, if you see something else, give me a call. Because I do know that that's why they put their time in there, right? It's going to gather the potential leads. And I think if you handle it right, it's a phenomenal way to do that, especially if you're new and trying to get built. But the way that it was handled, just from start to finish, and not only that, but as we were in the middle of this train wreck, another couple walks in.
Another train comes in.
Right. And so because we had moved that little table just a little bit to get into the front door, another couple walked in, and so they could have squeezed through without stopping by the jailhouse.
Bouncer's desk,
And so we are literally mid-conversation about what we're looking for. And this is not because he asked, this is because I'm telling you. Because we weren't going to make an offer that was $50,000 over asking price.
Right.
He stops And he says, and he tells the people at the door, hang on 1 second. And he leaves, he walks expediently from us to the front door, everything but being in a full-on sprint, to do the same thing with them. Hey, please sign in right here, before handshakes, before names, just sign in. And they had a couple kids with them. And so there was like 4 people jammed up in this little hallway. And I'm just looking at my wife, and he was so interested in getting that name, that phone number, and getting his card into the hand of the next person, that when he did allow them through the gateway of entering the house, as soon as he did that, we just moseyed out.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it dawned on him that we were leaving. And just because I know what you do occupationally, I'm thinking like, this cannot be the norm. Like this, tell me, like this is not, post-COVID service, like I know that the bar has been significantly dropped for like what people expect, but this was horrific. Yeah. And so my immediate thought was like, I've got to call Jimmy. I got to talk to him and see what this is like, because I think that not only did it open up our eyes to this massive gap between selling anything, and I told you, I almost felt like I wanted to call him from like a place of constructive criticism and being like, listen, man, I see you out there trying, but this approach you're taking, this will never ever close a deal. Right. So I don't know. Your take, I was curious what you were going to say and how you were going to...
when you called, and I shared with you, I'll share with our viewers. So usually whenever an agent hosts an open house, it's not necessarily to sell that house. Now, sometimes you have a house that sits on the market a little bit, we'll do an open house, hopefully to get some buyers in, trying to get that house sold. But when it's marketed properly, when the photos are done right and it's put out on the right websites and that kind of thing, it's going to sell as long as it's done. If you got a good listing agent, that house is normally going to sell within a week or so anyhow. But a lot of times new agents will come and say, hey, do you mind if I host that open house? Just trying to build up their sphere of influence and try to get potential buyers. And so when a buyer comes to an open house, a lot of times off to the side, and I'll check in on agents who run open houses on my listings, just stop in and say, let me see what you're actually doing here. And I love the fact that there is a refreshment table. There's some bottled waters, there's some, chips or whatnot, little business cards. You have a QR code. Hey, you can scan it, you get my contact information. And maybe there is a sign-in sheet there. There should be some way to be able to capture contact information when that potential customer is ready to offer that. But 100%, you got to be wise. And so,
by the way, no water, no cookies, no refreshments. But
I would have stopped at the door and said, I need something to eat or I'm leaving. Let's build some rapport. Let's talk. Walk the house. I'm here if you've got questions. That's the way it should go. So that's definitely not. But I appreciate you sharing that with me. I thought it was definitely interesting. So I want to pivot for a minute for time's sake. So you are a successful business owner. You are the quintessential entrepreneur, and I love that about you. Most of the people that I do business with, they really focus on real estate, and that's just not been your wheelhouse. So you do, we mentioned earlier, kind of freight forwarding, freight brokering, and that kind of stuff, which I'm going to tell me if I'm explaining this incorrectly. Basically, you have somebody who has some product that needs to ship, and you have somebody who has a way to ship it, but not the product, and you say, let me put you two guys together. Yep. So, I'm going to make this all happen, moving this from point A to point B, and sometimes there's some warehouses in between, and you manage that, and that's what your business is for the most part.
We're liaisons.
Okay.
Between shippers and truck drivers.
Okay, so you mentioned, this isn't what I set out to do necessarily. This was just kind of a vehicle that you're using, obviously for income generation. But I want to ask you a question. I asked James Like, who was a guest on our previous podcast, what is your why? If I ask you, Saul, tell me at the end of the day, why do you do what you do? At the most profound depth of that question, what is your answer? Why is it that you do what you do?
Well, I think, when my kids were young, it just to put diapers on their backs. But, as you get older and you mature more into your purpose, I really feel like the reason why I do what I do is to allow me the resource to co-labor with God in sowing his resources where he wants. So occupationally, the training and the skills have certainly helped develop, but God's favor and opening doors and creating opportunity has been the real secret sauce of the progression of where we've gone. And through my journey of starting in our garage, which
I remember that.
I think my first desk was one that you just gifted me.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Starting from our garage, my wife and I, in real humble starts to where we are now. One of the things that happened during that transition was my paradigm shift of thought process of tithing and giving in ministry. My parents always did it. I saw it growing up. I knew it was a thing. But as I got older, I got kind of turned off by some of the pastors and the private jets, and started to see Starbucks popping up in the playgrounds. And it just really seemed like poor stewardship.
Right.
In my mind, at that point in my life, and where the revelation that God had given me. And as I started to grow and mature in my walk with the Lord, He started to really open up my eyes to what resources for and what our responsibilities are. And so what I found is the more I leaned into that, as a conduit, the more resource He poured in. And I found real, genuine happiness being able to sow.
Right.
Not even really any one particular place. I mean, we have some places that God has put on our hearts specifically. I think as believers, the Bible's clear about orphans and widows and things that are for real the church's responsibility, like not the government's. But just through that process, my relationship with God just really got closer. It was like getting to have front row seats to all the answered prayers He was doing.
Right.
And so I feel like my why would be wrapped into that. I just want to be able to use God's resource for God's purpose and God's timing. And I found a very deep sense of fulfillment and purpose in doing that.
Okay. So you mentioned tithing and tithe life. So I want to kind of transition into that a little bit. I know that you came to me recently this past year, and were sharing with me a burden that the Lord had given you, 5 years ago, I think, something like that. So explain in general what is tithe life, what's going on with that, and just tell us whatever you want to tell us about that. I want the viewers to know more about that.
In terms of, if you're from a church standpoint, you have like prison ministry and outreach ministries, and so it started in our church. We're really locked in a very poverty-stricken area, and so we were trying to impact that. And so food pantries, food giveaways, everything, but it wasn't making an impact. And God really gave me a revelation that you're band-aiding the issue here. That at its core, like people's trust in me to be their provider is what this area is lacking. And that stewardship and tithing really is the root problem. So we started creating a small curriculum that we were doing in our church, our small neighborhood church, that we would teach this program to a couple of families at a time. And then it grew a little bit bigger, and to the point where the curriculum was developed. Well, I say developed, God gave us it in pieces, and over years, it turned into a curriculum that you could almost deliver conference style.
It's teachable.
Yeah, and because my personal walk with that was, I've been on both sides of the coin, where I'm an avid supporter of it now, and I was 100% against it 10 years ago. I've seen every side of this coin, and so I thought, man, there's got to be a more effective way to give people this vantage point, this revelation outside of just a Sunday service, where you're guilted and you're pushed and you're cursed, and wasn't effective for me, and I don't think it was going to be effective for other people. So we started to create this curriculum in a way where we could bring practical application. How does this affect me and my family, my job, my walk with God? What does it look like in today's society with social media and Bitcoin and all this other stuff? And so we started to do that, and as God began to put the pieces together, we were able to launch our first full-on conference in 2022. And it was such a joy to see it come to fruition. And at the culmination of the conference is people get to make a commitment with God that they're going to live this lifestyle of obedient kingdom contribution, which means fundamentally it starts with tithe, and then it goes as far as your heart will allow it. Right? That's what God says. Be a joy.
Yeah, I was there. We made the commitment. if I remember right, is if you're not tithing now, to commit to do that. Your local church, right? This isn't something that's like, hey, give me your money. This is, we're just teaching you principles and concepts from God's word for you to live out in your regular, everyday life, right? It wasn't like, all right, sign up here and bring your credit card. It wasn't that thing at all.
We say we teach the why, you decide the where.
Yeah, love that. Like I said, we were a part of that. That was a blessing to be there and to kind of see that unfold. So I do have a question that I know a lot of people have asked. There's a lot of prosperity gospel being taught right now, which is, you mentioned the jets and all that stuff. And a lot of times you see preachers who erroneously will say, send your money up here and God is going to bless you financially. You're going to be a millionaire. You're going to get this. You're going to win the lottery. You're going to do all these crazy things. And they envision, like, I'm going to send a little bit of money up to this mega church and now I'm going to be wealthy. So tell me, if someone says, this is just another prosperity gospel direction, being taught, tell me, give me your Reader's Digest version as to how you would answer that.
I'd say that if you're talking about God's blessing, it's really hard to take the word prosperity out of it. I think how people have defined prosperity is really what's caused problems, because that's not just financially. And it's certainly not that. The idea of the gifts that I give to my wife, or I give them from a place of love. I want her to know that when you open this bracelet, necklace, ring, jacket, it's just another form of me showing you my affection, my adoration towards you. They do have a monetary cost, but from its core, that's what I'm trying to present to you. And at Tithe Life, what we try to reframe is the idea that it's not what happens when you tithe. I mean, there are promises tied to it, like gravity. And those are things that we encourage people to read on and ask God to give them clarity and revelation on what that means. But the idea is that we're teaching people about why you do it, what God's word says about it. And the idea of releasing it is the hard part. And focusing on where it's going, where it's getting spent, and what happens when you do it, and how much comes back, and all that. Those are all byproducts of the obedience of just doing it.
Right.
And so that's our lane. We focus on why it's important to do it. And then as the steps go and as your relationship with God gets closer, there's always going to be a boomerang effect. But the biggest effect is the closeness with God.
Yeah.
And I think that all the other things, when the Bible says, seek, the kingdom first, and all the other things get added, it is certainly in that's the vein that we stay in. We're going to teach the principles. We're going to teach why it's important, how it helps us just in our walk with God. And all the other things that happen are just byproducts.
Right, they come along with it. So, one conference is done and under your belt, right? But there's a few more on the schedule. So tell me what is in the near future for Tithe Life.
Yeah, so we have we're doing our first conference of Q2.
Okay.
Next Saturday, April 15th. Our host ministry, which is what we call any church that we partner with, because we don't promote a denomination or a church. We're principle driven.
Sure.
And so we had a pastor of this church. He attended the event. And as soon as it was over, he said, I would love to do this at our church. And at its heart, that's really what we hope, is that every time we do this,
that fire will spread.
Just like you said, every check isn't going to come from you. It will come from your influence. And so our hope is that as we can encourage someone to buy into this truth, that person sows into God's kingdom for the rest of their life. And that has way more impact than any one check I can write. So we're doing a conference April 15th at Soba Church in Saginaw, Texas. You can register. It's a free event. We don't charge anything. It's brushfire.com/Tithe Life or tithelife.com/brushfire. That's how you register. There's no cost, but there is limited seating. So we ask that you register so we know how to get the setup for it. We're actually giving a couple $1,000s away. It's kind of ironic. People think we talk about tithes, so we want your money, we're selling stuff, and it really isn't that. And I, as much as I don't want people to come just for the money, we're not giving away money as an enticer. It's part of our demonstration process. Like every demonstration that we do, we're using real money. Because real money affects real reactions. And as we're trying to highlight different character traits of the human heart and the human mind, like you can't get that authentically if you're not doing real money.
No, listen, the first conference you did, like all of this money, how much money was brought in there?
It was just shy of $1 million.
$1 million, like actual cash money, like 10 feet from where I was. And it was weird to be in the presence of that much money. And then, you know, some things that you did there, we walked away with like cash in our pocket, right? Like there was like, I think it's like $163 or something that we just happened to walk away with that day. And it's like you said, there's something emotional about money that just, it gets people's attention, which then will open up their hearts to say, okay, you got your attention, now let's talk some biblical truths. So there's one on the 15th, but there's a big one coming up, man. Let's not, let's throw it out there.
So we have April 15th, which is the one coming up. Our big year-end one we're doing at the AT&T Stadium or the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. We're so excited about that. We have been in prayer and preparation for that event for about 3 years. It has literally been on like my goal board.
Yeah.
It looks like a 7th grade science project, with little stickers and cutouts. But we've really been praying and prepping for it. We're so excited. Tim Tebow is going to be a part of it. He's going to be one of our keynote speakers.
The Tim Tebow, that's a big deal.
The Tim Tebow. I feel so honored that you're going to be there and sharing your heart and your experiences. As much as we love having the big names to be a part of it, it's authentically knowing like people that are walking this out, because you can't communicate genuinely a principle that you don't walk out in your life. And one of the things of being able to watch you grow in your businesses and be a successful entrepreneur and watch how you sow seed all over the world with the missions that you do and things like that. And your support, even when Tithe Life was just a concept before we had a logo and a t-shirt and and a website and all that, just knowing your buy-in and your support of this biblical principle was sort of a common thread in the success that we've had in our respective businesses. Really meant a lot in the beginning. And so yourself, there's a few other speakers that we have. Brian Trejo is going to be there. He's going to share his testimony, share some songs with us. Jarrell Flowers from Rise Ministry. I mean, so we'll have a handful of different people going out there, but it's going to be the same thing. We're teaching God's principles, and it's amazing because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to be catchphrasy. I mean, it is what it is. It's going to be about giving. There's no secrets there. I hope that the biggest disconnect is the motive, is that we don't have a motive for anybody's money. Our motive is that you turn your heart to God, and the Bible's clear that He's the only one that can change somebody's heart. So we leave that up to Him. We give you a little coin, and if you want to make that jump and that just to lock it down, to anchor that moment. And again, it's not just for people that don't do this. This is for people that want to dive deeper in it. I've heard people say, I started with the tithe and God's put it on my heart to press in, and now we're giving 12%, 15%. I mean, all the way up to, I know people that are giving 90% of their income. And you think, how can you do that? Well, if your pie is big enough, you can do it. And that's really what we want people to keep in perspective, that when you give from a place of authentic love and knowing that you are doing this and serving God and His purpose, that He's going to foot the bill for whatever He tells you to do.
And for clarification, we're not talking about giving to Tithe Life or to this event. This is strictly teaching a principle that you go back to your local church with your core group of believers and your pastor, and that's something that you live out in your life. It's not like we're expecting to
there's no baskets. You don't give that day, and I think that's one of the things that people we use it as a crutch, right? Like, well, I don't think this church needs it. You look at some of these big churches, and I've heard people say, well, like Gateway doesn't need money. And the truth is, like, if Gateway wasn't being a good steward of their money, they wouldn't have what they have. I mean, that's just God's principles. And so it's unfair to look at because what if you move? What if the pastor lets you down? I mean, you can't stop a God-ordained principle because of man's circumstances. And so we say, you make the commitment. So if God sends you to Chile or Afghanistan or China, you're taking that commitment with you to wherever home church is feeding you and blessing you, whatever part of the earth God has you on. And so the commitment is between you and God. And that's one of the beautiful things about being able to give this and kind of remove that burden from pastors. That it's not about the pastor wants your money. Usually it's, are we just willing to let it go? And that's the first step. And that's kind of the, as we break through the hard ground, that's the first thing we have to get through. Is most of this is just, I don't want to give it up.
Right.
We give a lot of reasons of why, but at its core, that's the hardest thing.
Yeah,
So
I get that. I appreciate you sharing that. And what we'll do is at the included with the podcast, we'll have contact information there, website information, that kind of stuff. I know there's a YouTube channel, so we'll get all that put together for Tithe Life. So we're going to go ahead and wrap the episode up. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you coming and sharing your heart with me. So we close every episode of the closing call with a call to action. So I want to open that door for you and ask you to give a call to action. That can be anything business related, ministry, mindset, family. It can be anything that you want. If you could leave our viewers with one call to action today, what would that be?
I would encourage you to make it a habit to make one prayer a day for somebody else. Selflessness is the only antidote to the greedy nature that we are born with. And it has been an instrumental tool in my life and my wife's life. Just starting something small is every petition that I make is not for what I need and my needs, my health, my wants, just to purpose it for one individual and do it consistently and watch how that breakthrough for that person and knowing that you were able to contribute to that would be my encouragement to you. So make it a habit. One prayer every day for somebody else.
Very cool. I appreciate that very much. Guys, we're going to wrap this episode up. I appreciate you watching today. Saul, again, thank you for being here with us today with your host, Jimmy Henderson. This has been the Closing Call Podcast. Have a blessed day.